Well, if you've been to our house before, you have seen this clock. And usually when you walk into our house, well, it's been changed a little bit, but so I'll explain this in a minute. But this clock is an amazing clock to me. It's in our living room, and it's just the right size for the spot that it fits in on the wall. And it's just the right color that Mindy likes in our living room, the color palette. And it's in a great space for anybody that comes to our house can see it. And it really kind of sets off, it goes with everything else. There's only one problem with this clock. It's never worked. Now, if you've come to our house in the last 5 years, it's almost like you may look at that clock and think you are in a Twilight Zone episode. Because at the Gatchel house, it's always 7:02. Morning, night, this clock is right. But other than that, it's never right. Now, you might say, well, Seth, did you try new batteries? Yes, I have on multiple occasions. And that did not work. So I went to YouTube, which is my mentor, besides Lance and Mark, for helping me fix things at home. And there was a lady that said, the way you put the batteries into the back mechanism is important. Apparently she had the same problem. And I'm thinking, oh, good. Now I know what to do. And so I put the battery in, like she said, and it's still 7:02. And it's been 7:02 for about 5 years. Now, this looks like it should work. We bought it on the assumption that it would work and that it would tell time. But in spite of all of what I've tried to do so far, it's broken. Apparently, and again, this may not be true, the mechanism is broken. I'm guessing that, or it still could be user error. But I'm going to go with mechanism on this. And the essence of this is when the operation of something doesn't jive with its design, we call it broken. Now, this is true with clocks. It's true with cars. It's also true with people. It may look like it's supposed to work the way it should and function the way it should, live and relate the way it should, but if the operation of the human nature does not fit with the design of human nature, there is something broken with all of us. Now, in our church, if you've been with us a while, you've heard me or others talk about the 5 B's. And the 5 B's are our shorthand version of trying to help us as people in our church. How do you live as a Christian in a secular world and maybe post-Christian world, given the world that we live in? And our 5 B's help us to understand what's broken and what we can do about it. And the first piece of understanding is this thing of brokenness. If you have a handout, there are 3 things I want to mention today that are broken. And if it will help you immeasurably if you can come to a place where you not just see this and recognize this, but begin to live on the basis of this truth and in the way that you relate to other people. 3 kinds of brokenness. The first is we live in a broken world where things like clocks and cars and weeds occur. It looks like it should be the Garden of Eden, but eventually something always breaks down. The second kind of brokenness is we as people are broken. Every human being is broken. Our human nature is flawed. And the third kind of brokenness is a good brokenness. This is a redemptive brokenness that is meant for our benefit in terms of living life in this world. Let's talk about brokenness number 1. When you read Genesis 1 and 2, you see a world that was made perfectly. Everything functions the way it's supposed to. Seeds produce flowers, crops, vegetables, trees, and fruit. All the animals function like they're supposed to, some for food for others, and some, like for some of you cat people, your enjoyment. Others not so much. I get allergic to cats, but that's for some of you, you like that. But in Genesis 3, our world changed. It still looks like it should work the way it's supposed to and everything should function, but it just doesn't. And that's true of the world and of people. But we're just going to talk about the world for now. Now, one of the ways that you see this, and probably the most extreme example, is the life of Job. In the book of Job, Job starts out with that he was a faithful, God-honoring, God-fearing, noble, good man. And you might think, well, if you live that way, shouldn't that give you some ends with God and living in this world? And I'd like to read from Job 1:13. And this is what he experienced in a broken world. Verse 13, on the day when his sons and his daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen, he was a rancher and very wealthy, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them. And the Sabaeans, a group of Middle Eastern bandits, attacked and took them. They also slew the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. That's a sizable chunk of his assets and people that worked for him. While he was still speaking, another also came and said, the fire of God fell from heaven. We don't know what that was, but that's how the messenger interpreted what he saw. Fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. Herds of sheep. While he was still speaking, another came and said, the Chaldeans, another band of raiders, formed 3 bands and made a raid on the camels and took them and slew the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. All this happened on the same day. While he was still speaking, another came and said, your sons and your daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and behold, a great wind came from across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell on the young people, and they died, and I alone have escaped to tell you. This was not a bad guy that needed the judgment of God. This was a guy at the top of the heap. And he was faced with a broken world and broken people on the same day. Then Job rose and tore his robe, which was a sign of grief, and shaved his head, another sign of grief, and he fell to the ground and worshipped. He said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Through all this, Job did not sin, nor did he blame God. Now, you might think, reading that last couple verses there, that, wow, if I go through something like this, I hope I can do it. Well, the rest of the book of Job, virtually, is Job wrestling with God about what happened. And no matter how he tried to wrap his head around this, he could not wrap his head how these things could have happened to somebody like him. We live in a broken world. I get little pieces of this when I walk out into my backyard. Do you know that there are different seasons for weeds? There are winter weeds and summer weeds. And the little seeds are almost invisible. Now, you can put down pre-emergent on that. And I've got somebody that helps me with that, and I put down some of that. But that's not foolproof. When we first moved into our house, people say, oh, Seth, yes, in the back, the lady that we moved there was a gardener. And you must be a great gardener. No, I'm not a great gardener. I'm a great weeder. I do weeding. I have a friend of mine who had 6 appliances in his house all go out in the same week. And to make matters worse, sort of like Job's wife, she jumped on him because he wasn't getting them fixed in a timely manner. When we were early married, the transmission went out in our car, and I had no idea how we were going to pay for a rebuilt transmission. These kinds of things happen. Now, they are meant to drive us to our knees in a good way, to draw us to God. That's the broken world we live in. David had an example of this in Psalm 69, verse 19. You know how I am scorned and disgraced and shamed. All my enemies are before you. Scorn has broken my heart and has left me helpless. I looked for sympathy, and there was none. For comforters, but I found none. Now, why is it important to understand we live in a broken world? And the one word that I want to plant here in this first part about a broken world is the word expectations. Expectations. When I was in college, after my junior year, I'd just become a Christian. I still didn't know what I wanted to major in. Had been pre-med for 3 years, and I'm thinking, well, maybe I should go into history, which I loved history. And my dad, thankfully, signed me up for a boatload of professional testing, psychological and vocational testing. And I remember filling out these things, and finally I got to sit down with the guy who was going to read the results. And the results that he went through, there was about this much paper that were the results. And I'm thinking, man, I must be a tough case here. You know, and page by page, he was reading the results off this. And about halfway through, he looked at one sheet, and it was sideways, and he did a double take. This is on the psychological test. Did a double take. And there was a pause, and he said, I've never seen that. Now, I'm thinking in that middle quiet moment that this is a psychological test. And the thing that struck me was there's not a big difference between the word psychological and pathological. And maybe he was going to tell me something about myself that I didn't know. And it turned out on the bar chart on this, the top of the bar was idealist and the bottom of the bar was realist. And he said, Seth, your test score is supposed to fit somewhere on that bar chart, and it doesn't. If this is the top of the idealist bar here, your point on the test is about an inch above it. And I'm thinking, wow. So I thought that was good news. Now, this is 50 years ago. Now, over the last 50 years, I have been in the school of realism. And for my senior year in college and my 3 years of grad school, I stayed in the school of realism. And then when I became a pastor, God graduated me to grad school of the school of realism. And if you have a job that works with people, you understand what I mean. The school of realism, not just about people, but about me. And it turns out that if you are an idealist, if you are an unrealistic idealist, you are an expectation creating machine. And you will create expectations everywhere you go for yourself and for people that are unrealistic. About how your husband should relate to you and love you and understand and listen to you. Or how your wife should respond to you and thank you for all of your efforts to serve and to sacrifice yourself for her and for your children. You will have unrealistic expectations about your boss. Or about your mother-in-law. Or about your friends. Or about leaders in the church. Or about your pastor. And I was like this, a expectation machine. And guess what happens? Realism strikes. Now, here's the point. There's enough discouragement in life that we all are going to experience that is about this high. But expectations, unrealistic expectations, raise the level of potential discouragement to about here. This is self-inflicted discouragement if you are an unrealistic idealist. That was me. And I lived with this for about 30 years until I saw this. I was creating invisible landmines for myself and for people through my expectations. I did not understand that we live in a fallen world. Things like this are going to happen. The second thing is people are broken. You and I and the people that live with us and work with us and all this. What does that mean? The Bible has an umbrella term for this, and the umbrella term is sin. We are a sinner by nature. Now, that word does not just mean one particular thing, but it's an umbrella term, and it has lots of different usages or ways that we live this out. For example, Romans 3:23, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Every year I make some goals for myself and aspirations, and every year I fail to meet some of them. I don't even meet God's goals for me or God's aspirations for me. I fall short of those things. We miss the mark is another New Testament picture of sin. We're like an archer, and it looks like I should be able to hit that target. But every time I try, the arrow just sails over or under the target. Isaiah 53:6 gives us some other imagery here. We all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us goes to our own way. We just believe that we know better about how to live our life and how people ought to treat us and how life ought to go than God. And that just comes so naturally to us. We have turned each one to his own way, and without knowing it, maybe, each of us takes that big I, our ego, and plants it squarely in the middle of our heart as we are the captain of our life. And when we do that, we're a mistake and a mess-making machine. It's just a matter of time. But it seems so reasonable to do that. I want to be in control. I want to be in charge. Jeremiah 17:9 says the heart is deceitful, another picture of what sin looks like. In other words, we are blind to our self-centeredness. Desperately corrupt, broken. Who can understand it? I remember as a very young husband, and Mindy and I would have a disagreement and a conflict and have to make up. And I remember sitting there in the middle of this conflict with this thought. Well, I may be 10% wrong this time, but I'm sure she's 90% wrong. Now, what I didn't know was that she had the same ratio in mind, only in reverse. She was thinking, I might be 10% wrong, but he's 90% wrong. And that's one of the reasons why we have a conflict, is we cannot see our own blindness and our own desperately self-centered nature. We are broken people. Now, what drives this brokenness? And I love one of the images that God gives to us from the book of Jeremiah. Jeremiah 2:13. He speaks to Jeremiah. Jeremiah gives this message to the people. My people have committed two sins. They have forsaken me, the spring of living water, and have dug their own cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot hold water. Now, what is a cistern? When we went to Israel a number of years ago, we went to a cistern. We walked up a long, high hill, and when we got to the top of the hill, the people who lived there several thousand years ago had out of this hill dug out this huge bowl that sort of looked like a massive funnel. And it was about the size of about 3 football fields, except in a circle. And what they had done was, living in an arid, hot desert climate, is that they dug this out of the limestone such that when it rained, they had plenty of water. We know what to do. We don't have to depend on God anymore for water for our crops or for cleaning or for cooking or for our cattle, our sheep. We got it wired. We know what to do. Then Jeremiah, God uses this analogy of water to say, what my people have done with water, they've done with me. This is not an issue of should we provide water, should we be responsible, should we be prudent. That is not the issue here. It's good to be prudent, and it's to be wise and to think ahead. But there's something else that God is putting his finger on that's making a mess of things that the people cannot see. And that is, they want to be in control on their terms. Broken cisterns that cannot hold water. And he says, here are the two sins. He breaks it down into 2 parts. The first is we forsake God. Now, what's interesting to me is that the first part of this verse, he says it's addressed to my people, to God's people. He's not addressing this to secular, atheistic, Northeastern and Boston university professors. It would be like Jeremiah's here, and he's speaking to us, my people. And then said, they have committed 2 sins, they have forsaken me. And I can imagine just imagine if I said that to you. All of us have forsaken God. You would think, maybe we should ramp up this Seth retirement thing a little sooner. I think he's losing grip. How have we forsaken God? And he says, they have forsaken me, the spring of living water. And what he's saying is, using the analogy of water, in the same way that we need water in order to live, we need God in order to live well, to live rightly, for this broken part of me to be fixed. Or you might think of it this way. All of us are in pursuit of something or some things, multiple things, that we believe, whether we're aware of it or not, will satisfy us and fulfill us. And to feel loved and to feel secure and to be approved and to be validated and to feel a sense of importance and a sense of rightness. And we do this, we attach some value and some level of dependence to all of these things without having to depend on God. And when we do, it's just a matter of time before we make great messes, either personally or relationally. And God says, no. This is a bad idea. They hadn't forsaken God in showing up on the Sabbath or praying, but in their heart, something else, multiple things had taken the place of God in their functional daily water. And what he says, well, what is it from God? He's using the analogy of water, a spring of living water. Now, if you go out in the desert, there are places where, like hot springs, where it's an amazing thing about a spring. The water just keeps coming. How does it do that? I don't know. I'm not a geologist, but somehow the water just keeps coming. It's always there. It's always available. And the second analogy he uses is living water. You might think, well, isn't water living? In the physical sense, yes. But the living water is something that we need that nothing else in this world can provide. Not the best marriage, not the best kids, not the best boss, not the best job, not the best church. Something else is needed that only God can provide. Now, sin number 2, we try to create our own water. Now, when I was, one example, I've done this multiple times with all kinds of things, but one of the examples you've probably heard me talk about before is when I was growing up, my father was a workaholic. And he was gone about 7:15 in the morning, be home about 9:45 at night. We loved my dad, but just didn't see him that much during the week. And even on the weekend, he'd go off to play golf on Saturday or Sunday afternoon. And somewhere in high school, I remember thinking, I'm not going to do that. I'm probably going to be a dad someday, and I want to be engaged with my children. I want to be there at a lot of different things that my dad wasn't at with me. And I think in my heart, what I, in retrospect only, looking back, did was, that's one of the keys to life. Just be the consummate dad, and your kids will be so glad that Seth is my dad. And my wife will be so glad that her husband is the children's dad. And the people in my church will be so look at what a great dad Seth is. And I can look at myself in the mirror and be quite satisfied. What a great dad. Now, that is a cistern. Now, there's nothing wrong with trying to be a great dad. Nothing wrong with wanting to do that. But what my heart said was, I need that. And it's very easy to do that, not just with bad things like drugs and alcohol or sex, but with good things. Being a good mom, being a good worker, being a good boss, being a good pastor. But when we make those things our water, our source of water for our souls, we commit the same two sins that God puts his finger on here. Now, it's interesting that at the end of this verse, they have dug their own cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot hold water. Now, what does that mean? Well, in the world there, in the real cistern, they carved this out of, I think it was limestone. And when it rained, for a while, it looked like the cistern was working. Look at all this water. And they dug these ramps down in the middle of this rock slowly so that no matter what level of water was, you could take your water jars down to that level and have plenty of water. The cisterns worked for a while, but there were two problems eventually. Is if when in a hot climate, rock expands during the day and contracts at night, and that creates leaks. And so even though it might be like a whole lot of water on Monday, by the time Saturday comes, what happened? And the other problem with cisterns is if the water doesn't leak, what happens to standing water? It turns green, and in my yard, it turns to mosquitoes. They just love standing water. Broken cisterns that cannot hold water. So the kinds of things that we make out of cisterns look like they're working for a while, but eventually they're broken. It doesn't produce what I thought it would. Doesn't provide the satisfaction or fulfillment. So what happens? Well, God breaks our cisterns. And there are two ways that this happens. One is natural consequences eventually occur. In my case, wanting to be the consummate dad and making that a cistern, my satisfaction rests on that. Guess what God allowed me to experience? Teenagers. And suddenly teenagers weren't so thrilled as they were when they were 5 or 6 to have somebody like me as their father. I became a babbling idiot to my teenagers for a while. And even though I do counseling and talk to people and have worked all my life to learn wisdom about life and about relationships and how we tick, you think they had any interest in that? Nope. Off they went. And so what happened to my consummate need to be a consummate dad? I started having problems that I hadn't had before with anger towards my children. Now, what I could not see for a couple of months was my anger was not the result of them being disrespectful, present company excluded, or rebellious. My problem was my cistern wasn't working. As long as I had hitched my horse to the need to be seen as a consummate dad, and my children were not cooperating on any given day, I was going to be angry. So trying not to be angry, God, please help me not to be angry. That's a good prayer, but that's sort of like having an engine problem and throwing water at it. Until I put oil in the crankcase, I'm going to continue to have an engine problem. God breaks our cisterns, our false trust, sometimes through natural consequences, like teenagers, or sometimes he speeds up the process. And we don't like this oftentimes by bringing trouble to show us our cisterns aren't working. An example comes from Ezekiel 30. God speaks to Ezekiel, uses the term, Son of man, I have broken the arm of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. It has not been bound up for healing or put in a splint as to become strong enough to hold a sword. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says, I am against Pharaoh, king of Egypt. I will break both his arms, the good arm as well as the broken one, and make the sword fall from his hand. The idea is the same as the water in cisterns. He allowed Pharaoh to break his arm as a metaphor. What was Pharaoh trusting in? His strength, his military. Now, this is not, God is for the military. We looked at that last month in the message on truth. And we live in a broken world. We need the military. This is not something against the military, but it's something against Pharaoh trusting his strong arm in the military. And apparently that wasn't enough to get his attention, so God broke the other arm as a metaphor, where he could not even pick up the sword to get his attention in the same way the water would here. Ezekiel 6:6, another example. Wherever you live, the towns will be laid waste. and the high places to foreign gods demolished, so that your altars to foreign gods will be laid waste and devastated, your idols smashed and ruined, your incense altars broken down, and what you have wiped out. In other words, God says you're trusting in something that's going to eventually mess you up, going to bring trouble to you and trouble to the people that you care about, and I'm going to do something to stop it. If you won't, I will, for your benefit. Now, typically, because we're sinners, what God? How can God be so mean to me? Why doesn't he do what he wants to? One of the best titles of a book I've ever seen is A Severe Mercy by Sheldon Van Auken. God will use severe mercy to get our attention. Brokenness number 3. God uses brokenness to bring us back to him. Bring us back to him, back to living water. The book of Ecclesiastes is multiple illustrations of all of the things of the world that seem like they should work, don't. And Solomon ended up he tried all of these things and they didn't. Banner number 1, discovering God. And one of the ways we discover God is through trouble and when our cisterns aren't working, when we think they ought to. Psalm 51:16 is the end of David's prayer of repentance after he committed adultery with Bathsheba. Notice his response. For thou hast no delight in sacrifice. Were I to give a burnt offering, thou wouldst not be pleased. The sacrifice acceptable to God is a broken spirit. A broken and contrite heart, O God, you will not despise. This is a redemptive brokenness. One that stops us in our tracks, keeps us from continuing to be expectation-making machines, creating more cisterns, being angry at people and angry at God, and brings us to find living water through him. Now, one of the things that I love about this last brokenness is that I can almost hear God saying to me, finally. You finally get it. And as a dad, with my teenagers, when they were about 13 or so, and 13 and 11, I saw it. I was using my children to feel good about me. Now, I was loving them and devoted and serving them and all those kind of things, but this over here was a problem. And God said, no more of that. No more of that. You're going to make a mess of things as long as you need their response and the response of people. So he doesn't just break us, but he also builds. God builds us. Behold, happy is the man whom God reproves. This is Job 5:17 and 18. Behold, happy is the man whom God reproves. Despise not the chastening of the Almighty, for he wounds, but he binds up. He smites, but his hands heal. And this has happened to me in our marriage, with me as a husband, with me as a dad, with me as a pastor, with me in our career. God's been at work in my life in these things. Amos 9:11. In that day I will restore David's fallen tent. What's David's fallen tent? Well, this is David's house where the king, he'll be the king, and his throne will endure forever, all the way down to the line of Jesus, and then through Jesus to people. And it had become virtually destroyed. And God says to the promised Amos, I'm going to restore that. You think, how? Amos must have been thinking, how in the world? I will repair its broken places. I will restore its ruins and build it as it used to be. In Isaiah 58:12, your people now, not just God, but now he wants to use you and me. Your people will rebuild the ancient ruins and raise up the age-old foundations. You will be called the repairer of broken walls, the restorer of streets with dwellings. Not talking about God here. He's talking about God using you and me to do this. One of the things that is so amazing to me about God's work in our lives is, one example, is the problem of generational sin. We have one of the guys that's been in our church a long time who was raised in one of the most dysfunctional families that I heard in my lifetime. And his parents were just completely dysfunctional. And he was the oldest of his siblings. And at a very young age, he had to become the breadwinner. I think he was in junior high, and became the effective parent of his siblings. And when he got into adulthood, it was very easy for him to slide back into what had been for generations back, not just his parents, but their parents and the parents before them. And this man became a Christian in our church, and God did his work here of brokenness and rebuilding and repairing. And some of you were a part of that, of helping him do this. This is God's great story, not just in us now, but through us to other people. Let's pray together. Brokenness. Lord, thank you for helping me to become a recovering idealist, unrealistic idealist, in the long process of becoming a realist about the world. The wonder of what you've created for us, but not to be surprised when things don't work the way they're supposed to. And being realistic about others' human nature being broken and mine being broken, both in need of repair. And over the long haul, many decades, five decades now, you've been doing that in me. And thank you for the gift of the good brokenness, repentance, where again and again and again you invite us back to yourself, even after we have inadvertently kicked you outside the circle and put something else inside as our real source of satisfaction and been an expectation-making machine. Thank you for breaking these cisterns and bring us back to a place where we are trusting you primarily for our source of satisfaction and fulfillment, that we matter, that we are loved, that we are valued, that we are important. We thank you that you make that possible through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.